In the world of cyberpunk, there's not really any room for the moral high ground anymore. Even if one doesn't elect to play that Night City game, if you live there, it's really just a matter of time until you have no choice but to deal in. And, unfortunately, for the once dedicated medtech, Wakako Okada, her time of a normal, simple life ran out all too soon. But despite her struggles, and despite grievous loss, as well as the railroading of her loyalties to a gang she otherwise wanted nothing to do with, Wakako is a rare example of quiet strength among the loud weakness of Night City. Hello, my name is Liddy, and welcome to Shaped by Stories, where, in sharing my own perspective on some of my favorite stories and characters, I hope to see some of your own unique perspectives and opinions on the very same subjects. We are all shaped by our own stories, both lived and observed. Let's get into it. Wakako Okada was born in Japan's Kansai region, probably sometime in the early to mid-2000s. It's a bit hazy. The Kansai region is home to some of Japan's most famous cities, like Osaka and Kyoto. In the world of cyberpunk, the Kansai region has a mindset more akin to the typical Westerner, and this, perhaps, made Wakako's move to Night City all the easier when she applied to the Night City University. She was actually studying clinical medicine in the United States when she met her future husband, Night City native Hiroto Miyamoto. While I can't find anything speaking of Hiroto's personal level of involvement with the Tiger Claws, he was at least connected to them through his childhood friend, Hayato Nakagawa. And I do gotta talk about Hayato and his father Shinobu a bit to really get into Wakako's story and how she ended up tied up with the Tiger Claws. Hayato was the adopted son of famous kabuki actor Shinobu Nakagawa. Shinobu actually played a key role in creating the Tiger Claws as we know them in 2077. After the Night City Holocaust of 2023 ended up destroying a lot of Japantown. Nakagawa used his resources and political savvy to form the Night City Co-Prosperity Sphere, bringing together lots of Japanese corporate power in order to move the district's Japanese population into the newly dubbed Kabuki district of Watson. The Tiger Claws were made up of the remains of some old gangs in Japantown, who were reformed by the NCCS to protect the people of Kabuki. The Nakagawa Foundation was the manager of all the assets that were pooled together following this exodus, headed by, of course, Shinobu. While Hayato himself was not a Tiger Claw by default, even if his dad was technically their leader through the NCCS, he was potentially in line to inherit an insane amount of money and power either way. And you can imagine the danger that could come from simply associating with him. Hayato decided to join up with the Tiger Claws officially during the Fourth Corporate War. So, definitely by time Wakako and Hiroto got together, Hiroto had a connection to one of the highest members of the Tiger Claws. Despite the gang's shadow creeping over their lives, Wakako lived a happy life with her husband. She focused all her energy on her work, becoming a medtech with Kiroshi after graduating. Any other time and energy she had left, she devoted to her marriage and to her husband's family. And while it's not explicitly stated when she had her first of 9 sons, she could have even been balancing motherhood along with everything else. But there was one job Wakako and her husband took on after this point that would prove to be deceptively fatal in the end. Hayato was engaged to a woman named Ryoko Fujiwara, a member of one of Japan's most economically and politically powerful zaibatsus. Theirs was actually an arranged marriage brokered when they were both children, but the two were lucky enough that it bloomed into a genuine love. It was a prosperous match, considering the fame of Hayato's father and the power and wealth of Ryoko's family. But Hayato publicly joining the Claws and building a very loud rep for himself amidst the Fourth Corporate War made Ryoko's family call off their engagement. It was only through the help of Wakako and Hiroto that the lovers were still able to meet in secret, maintaining a connection that would eventually result in the marriage that they were once promised to have. It's very nice of Wakako and her husband to help their friends out like this, until this affiliation with Hayato would rip Wakako's life apart. In 2042, Shinobu Nakagawa suddenly died, and with his mysterious death, his power and wealth was thrown to the dogs. A powder keg of a gang war exploded, and Hayato Nakagawa was right in the middle of it. Hayato, of course, was vying for his father's seat of power, but so were countless others. His enemies sought to hit where it would hurt him most, and word carried of Wakako and Hiroto's friendship with him. Tragically, Hiroto was killed in an attack by Hayato's enemies, with Wakako only just managing to escape. While Hayato did eventually come out on top, becoming the next leader of the Claws and inheriting his father's wealth and the Nakagawa Foundation, he acknowledged his own role in his close friend's death. And so Hayato swore to always protect and provide for the grieving widow of his old friend. And this sounds nice, much like Wakako and Hiroto's job as matchmakers, until you realize that Wakako's own wishes did not factor into this at all. Wakako did not have any say whatsoever in Hayato's continued involvement in her life. Whether she wanted the protection and resources of the Claws or not, she would have it. She became almost a hostage member of the Tiger Claws by force. Wakako, after this forced association with the Tiger Claws, clawed out as much independence from this life as she could, even if it wasn't much. She continued to work as a medtech for Kiroshi, even if it might not have been what Hayato wanted. Ryoko Fujiwara, now the head of the Nakagawa Foundation, kept asking Wakako to quit and come and work with her as her second-in-command of the company. In Cyberpunk RED's dossier on Wakako, in fact, she is labeled the reluctant confidant, specifically to Ryoko. They're described as very close friends, but there's almost this hint of this tension. Ryoko will always be kept at arm's length because how can Wakako fully trust her? I can imagine for her that after everything that's happened, she's not going to be trusting people in general very easily. I think this is where Wakako's ruthlessness and almost self-isolation really sort of took root. Insofar as we can tell, Wakako never did take Ryoko's offer. Even if she did, it is likely she did so on her own terms, especially considering the intimidating, independent fixer she would become. Even as the 2040s rolled by, Wakako was still as under Tiger Claw watch as ever. But rather than let this ongoing sort of railroading get her down, Wakako decided to make the most of her situation. By the 2050s, Wakako became a fixer, and by the time V and Jackie are on the scene in the 2070s, she is one of Night City's most respected fixers, as well as one of the most feared. While I'm sure Wakako witnessed a lot of cold tactics back in her days with Kiroshi, being a corp and all that, there's no doubt that she picked up a lot of her fixer efficiency and ruthlessness from her time among the Claws. For her, it just became a, if you can't beat them, don't join them, just marry them and learn all their secrets and tactics and everything situation. Wakako married 4 more times following the death of her husband, and all of these men were, in her own words, high up in the Tiger Claws. She explains to V that they all held power in Japantown, making their fortunes and gathering influence through the sex trade, among others. Perhaps Clouds was on the radar of one of her last husbands, back in his day. Wakako says that all 4 of these men died tragically before their time, but the circumstances of their deaths are all rather mysterious, And in some of her gigs, she doesn't exactly speak of these husbands with a lot of love. There's one I think she explicitly says that, like, she divorced him and took him for all he was worth. Wakako also certainly doesn't seem too worried about her former husband's bad luck affecting herself. There's no solid proof that I could find, but I do think it's safe to assume that she had a certain strategic hand in the sudden demises of these men. I can totally see it, because Wakako is now arguably one of the most powerful people in Japantown, rivaling many of the full-on Tiger Claws who've staked out claims in the area. One of her gigs actually involves V taking out a claw who's seeking to take the district out from under her. And yeah, the old Lioness of Westbrook doesn't like that at all. She crushes any and all attempts of removing her from power, and you get why when you consider her past. After working so hard to gain what power and independence she now has, she certainly would not want to lose it. I think that is what makes Wakako as scary as she is. Like, in my opinion, she's the scariest fixer. I do not want to disappoint her on any of her gigs. I don't want to. She scares me the most. While Wakako herself is still not a full claw, she seems to have more pull with the organization in 2077 than she ever has. And this is because, connecting with her dead husbands, I think, all of Wakako's 9 sons have their own role in the gang's leadership. I think it's entirely possible that her sons with her husbands inherited their father's power and position, not unlike Hayato did when his father died. Sure, maybe after a bit of a gang war, but hey, Wakako's resourceful, maybe she helped set up her son's avenue to power. She certainly benefits from her son's authority, at the very least. This lady strikes me as someone who would make big moves like that very carefully, but also very boldly. Let me know if you think Wakako is a Black Widow type of lady in the comments below. There's also a phone call that you can listen to between Wakako and Rogue, where she tells Rogue that the Claws who attacked one of her gigs were not her boys, showing that Wakako does have some Tiger Claws who will do her bidding, likely courtesy of her sons. Now, whether Wakako is being truthful here with Rogue, I can totally see that being up in the air, because the Wakako of 2077 is absolutely ruthless. If there's good money to be made and power to be gained, Wakako will act without hesitation against anyone. She will stoop low. It's kind of easy to forget this part, but Wakako is the fixer who more or less gave Evelyn Parker to the scavs. For me, this makes her, at least so far in my research on the fixers, the worst of all the fixers in Night City, if we're just talking morals. Like, I'm not gonna say any fixer is a good fixer. No. All fixers are about business. For Wakako to throw Evelyn to the dogs for her own probably minor benefit is just horrible. Like, the scavs are the lowest of the low, and that really says a lot about the people who are willing to deal with them. Wakako herself works out of a pachinko parlor on Jig Street, a sleazy hole even by Night City standards. There's something about its design that just feels grimier than the rest of Night City. Something poisonous even, like the air there burns a bit, I don't know. That's just how it feels for me. It's a very suitable location for Wakako to work her fixer magic from there, because that street is where someone goes to feed their darkest desires. There's illegal goods that you can't really find anywhere else in Night City, at least not as easily. There's abuse even from the Soul Ripper Doc, who pretends that he's so charitable when he does screw over a lot of the working girls who come to him just trying to survive. Like, Jig Street is no Lizzie's. There's no organization like the Mocks there to protect the working girls and the other sex workers that operate out of there. Clouds, as crappy as it is with the Tiger Claws lording over it, it's still a step up from Jig Street. Like, Evelyn went from Clouds into that gutter, and then look at what happened. Like, oh my god. It's just like a step away from the scabs. Actually, I'm pretty sure if you cross the road into the market, like the Cherry Blossom Market, you can actually get kidnapped by the scabs if you go and take a brain dance from this guy and fall for his whole scam. Like, that happened to me. this is a shithole. I know Night City is in general, but there's just something about the fact that right next door to each other you have two people who will deal with the scavs and send unfortunate victims their way for money. And it just suits Wakako in the sense that as soon as we walk on that street, we see the level that she will go to get her next snack. Right down to the gutter. Again, not even on the Tiger Claw's behalf, on entirely her own. Many of Wakako's gigs, in fact, involve going against the Tiger Claws. Stealing from them, rescuing people from them. It doesn't really matter to her either how many of them V kills. Wakako describes her own apathy towards these claws by reasoning that they all brought their deaths upon themselves. They were too stupid and too greedy and got sloppy enough to get in the hit list of a fixer. Tough luck. But of course when it comes to the random Tiger Claws you can just, blow up in the street. Well, maybe Wakako just knows that V is a little too useful, I guess, to be like, oh no, I can't work with you anymore. No, she wouldn't do that. When it comes to her sons as well, she has raised them all to be extremely careful with their actions in the gang. By 2077, all 9 of her sons seem to be alive and kicking, as their mother's strictness has kept them off the lists of other fixers. But before we get into the final section, I must mention one of the pluses of working for Wakako, despite her ruthlessness and her very, very, very low standards. If you are indeed a quality solo or netrunner or anything, she will go to great lengths to make sure you are still happy in her pocket. She pays her people well, and she sends V on a number of gigs that involve saving her most valuable assets. We save the netrunner bugbear for Wakako from the Tiger Claws, and we save a long-time, loyal, and effective netrunner, Chang-Hoon Nam, who Wakako genuinely wants to make sure is still alive. That's why she sends V to make sure he's okay. She also helped out Becca and Pilar from Edgerunners, actually, when it came to getting them on the solo map. This was out of a sense of gratitude for their father's years of good work for her. She also tries to help out Julio in Edgerunners, probably as a favor to someone else, although this does lead to him resting in pieces. Wakako is also involved in the main questline. When V and Takamura go and ask her for help in raiding the Arasaka parade, she's at first reluctant. Both V and Takamura are Night City's most wanted, and Takamura himself is technically Arasaka. She knows it's dangerous to hit the hornet's nest, as it is, but she gives in, and she lends V the info that they need. This is because Wakako has a burning hatred for Arasaka that stems from the killing of her grandson. Part of me wonders even if her distaste for the corporation has ruffled some feathers in the gang, and maybe even affected her own son's business decisions. We don't know how far her own opinion ripples up that ladder. At the end of the day, don't be fooled by this old woman's clean, dignified, and almost soft-spoken way. Don't be confused into thinking she's this flawless, inspirational beacon of strength as her earlier years may demonstrate. Because, as her in-game description says, she's a lioness just looking for her next snack. Now, I wanted to take a second to talk about Wakako's full-body tattoo. It could literally just be a design choice, considering her affiliation, but I just find the real-world context of such tattoos too interesting to not talk about. Specifically when it comes to the autobiography of Shoko Tendo, Yakuza Moon. Shoko was born in 1960s Osaka to a Yakuza father in a relatively privileged life. She grew up around the tattoos that the organization has made infamous. To quickly note, the Chinese triad also has similar tattoos, and one could argue that both these real-world entities do influence a lot of the Tiger Claws. I'm pretty sure that's stated somewhere in the lore. But either way, these tattoos aren't just for looks, and each piece is personal. Each tattoo is unique, with countless variations of mythological figures and stories. And most of them, at least in our world, are hand-inked, which is like a lot of time and dedication and also pain tolerance you have to get one. In the cyberpunk world, I'm sure it's just as easy as going to a ripper, or maybe some people still do it by hand-inking. Shoko Tendo's life, as I said, started in relative comfort, until her father's business ventures went under and he resigned from the Yakuza. Her mid-teens to early 20s were full of drug abuse, sexual abuse, and extreme depression and loss. Shoko's story is full of devastating examples of just how crappy the world can be, and how hard it is to break out of cycles, especially when you're basically born right into them, more or less, or even next to them. But hers is also a story that shows her great strength in overcoming these dark periods of her life, and getting herself together. At the end of Yakuza Moon, she recounts the moment when she truly felt free, after quitting her job as a hostess, looking up and seeing a full moon. The meaning she takes from it is not unlike the lyrics of the song that Hanako Arasaka sings in the parade mission, that song being Kojo no Suki. It's a really powerful moment, and I kind of just, when I read that part, I was reminded of Hanako and the song she sings. I get more into that in Hanako's video. But, as I'm sure you've noticed, just from the cover of this book, one of the most important moments of Shoko's life is when she chooses to get a full-body tattoo, in the style typical to many Yakuza. The main character of this tattoo is of a courtesan, Jigoku Dayu, and Jigoku Dayu is a Japanese legendary semi-historical figure. Her name translates actually to Hell Courtesan. Shoko's tattoo artist tells her of how Jigoku Dayu worked her way to the top spot in the Muromachi court, taking advantage of a situation that was forced upon her as a courtesan. As in, she was kidnapped and sold to a brothel in her youth. She really had no choice but to work and hope she could earn her freedom, or that some man in the court would buy her freedom. She really had to make the best of what was thrown at her. Shoko doesn't get this tattoo because she's Yakuza or wants to be one. Neither of those things are true. Rather, she gets this tattoo out of a love of its beauty, but mainly the strength of this figure's story. Shoko decides not long after getting this tattoo to prioritize herself and make herself her number one. And this is how she finally breaks out of her final abusive relationship. This tattoo was a huge moment of independence and defiance on Shoko's part, and over the years she adds to it to the point that it does become a full body piece. I am skimming over a lot of her story here just to keep this section short, but I would strongly recommend reading her book. Yakuza Moon is amazing. I could not put it down and I blew through it in a single night. I will link it in the description. You can get it on Amazon. This video is not sponsored. I just really enjoyed it. She actually wrote a new foreword for the latest edition where she talks about how her life has just been so much more fulfilling and peaceful and happier since she shared her story. It was very healing for her. Point is, when it comes to Shoko's story and what that tattoo means to her, and what Jigoku Dayu's story is, I can't help but relate that to Wakako Okada. Maybe for Wakako, despite her own distaste for the claws, getting that tattoo was an act of her own defiance. Maybe she has Jigoku Dayu on her back as well, with that dagger in her mouth. But at the end of the day, these two women are significantly different, and I think that it is that difference that actually makes looking at them side by side very important. That difference being that no matter what wringer you go through in life, no matter what horrors you come out of, don't be a Wakako, losing your humanity along the way. Instead, be a Shoko. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and also for taking on my book recommendation. I hope if you do get Yakuza Moon, I hope you enjoy it. If you end up reading it or have read it, like, come back here and leave comments on it. She's a fascinating, remarkable lady, Shoko Tendo. And also, this video is sponsored by my book, Kaisaria Book 1, a post-apocalyptic fiction book. That's right, guys, I'm my own sponsor. New year, new sponsor, and that sponsor is me. I swore that this year I would talk more about my book, because I'm usually very shy about it, and I'm like, I can't do that, I have to just... I wrote a book, and if you want to support the channel, it would mean a lot to me if you wanted to pick up a copy. And also, any honest reviews, honest, keyword, honest capital letters helps me be a better writer. Thank you so much to my members. You guys are amazing. Members floating up the screen in the opposite way that snowflakes do, because there's snowflakes outside my window. And of course, thank you to everybody for watching, as always. And I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you again in the next video. Goodbye!